Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a great one for you. And here is what we're talking about. Jeff Stein in the Washington Post has a complete and total accounting of where Joe Biden's agenda stands as the meat grinder of Joe Manchin continues to move its way through it. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to be looking at that very, very closely and breaking down a pretty important question for progressives that they're undoubtedly going to be considering. Should they even vote for this thing? Like, seriously. We'll discuss. Also, a little bit of Democratic Party history from Democratic Party historian Ryan Grimm in The Intercept for you today. Talking about why, Krysten Sinema may be very discouraging, may be a sign of, the corporate capture of the Democratic Party, but there may be reason to believe that grip may just slip sometime soon. Also, why the popularity of Squid Game terrifies me. That's a headline from an opinion piece we're going to be reading today from Frank Bruni in the New York Times. I started this one a little bit, but normally I try to go into completely cold. I started this one a little bit, very interested to see the case he was going to make. I didn't really get to the kicker. I don't know exactly where he's going with it. I read the first two paragraphs or so. So I don't quite know where he's going to go with that, but it should be a lot of fun, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I believe we're on 572 Snooze Flash. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it today. We're going to go through it all. This is Jeff Stein, Rachel Robine, and Mariana Sotomayor in the Washington Post. Even as negotiations here over President Biden's economic package continue, Democratic officials have started signaling which parts of the White House agenda could be cut from the legislation and which are likely to be improved. So Biden, for instance, said on Thursday that his plan to create universal free community college had fallen out of the bill. The president acknowledged his new clean energy plan to incentivize utility firms to move away from fossil fuels is in danger of being jettisoned. So pretty much what Biden is coming out here and straightforward admitting is he has no real power over his agenda. This is not you're going to give a little bit, get a little, it's a compromise. No. He started off at $6 million. Joe Manchin coming into this year of negotiating, coming into in the wake of the January 5th election when Democrats knew they were going to have control of the Senate, Joe Manchin, he came out and said, we'll do $4 million in infrastructure spending. But he's through Joe Biden not actually being aggressive and assertive, Joe Biden's putting these two bills up, which was from the beginning a very, very disastrous choice because what he did is he split up all the, the corporate priorities and all the kind of progressive priorities. So pretty much what happened was when the progressive, or, the progressive priorities could pretty much be singled out and effectively attacked without being, tagged to the corporate priorities. So the president acknowledged that, this, and really what he's acknowledging is he has no control over his agenda. Joe Manchin, he's talking at $4 million at the beginning of this, $4 trillion at the beginning of for this infrastructure, whatever the hell the number was. And now he is so significant, or no, it's billion now, not trillion. Is it $3.5 trillion? I really, no, yeah, it's $3.5 trillion, and he was at $4 trillion. In the beginning. So he's already, and now $3.5 trillion is being portrayed now as the Bernie Sanders kooky crazy idea that's, never going to pass or whatever. And that just shows you who is manipulating the terrain here. And, Joe Biden, he has not shown a lot of interest. The White House has not shown nearly enough interest in conviction for Joe Manchin, because what the White House would love to have you believe here, as this all kind of goes down in flames, is that it is just Joe Manchin to blame. Joe Manchin is the only person, and Krysten said, we hate them. They're the only person who really could have stopped or could have had control over this. Don't forget, by the way, that I'm in the White House. I'm the president of the United States, but of course, no, there's nothing I could have done to pass this bill. With them just trying to come in and stand in the way, I had a few certainly worded meetings. What more do you want? That is what they're going to try and get you to believe here, but just it is not true. And not only is it not true on the Biden side, it's not true on the Senate side. There's tons of Democratic senators who are not tons, but at least 7 or 8, who are against key provisions of this bill and would be happy to stand in the way, but they're just more happy to have Krysten, Sinema, and Joe Manchin stand in the way for them for political purposes. Like, that is the calculation that they're making right now, and the calculation that Joe Biden is making right now is he doesn't care whether this bill goes through and is more than happy to have, again, Joe Manchin come out and, he's doing them all a great public service. This is really what he is. And Biden now coming out saying in the Washington Post pretty much completely that he has no control over what happens with his agenda and what happens with his presidency, and he is more or less fine with it. So the bill is also likely to retain significantly smaller versions of a wide range of Biden proposals, such as initial plans to provide roughly $300 billion for housing and homelessness, $400 billion for elder care for seniors, $450 billion for a child tax credit, which is going to be extended again for a year. I saw like Richie Torres, who's kind of like your Biden outrider, I guess you could say, in the House, getting an argument with some a left-wing pundit, being just like, oh, he's advancing the Build Back Better, Build the American Rescue Plan, and the BIF, which is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. And it is really like this is what they're trying to, like, those things aren't passed. Like, those things, like, hello, these things clearly are not passed. Like, what are you talking about? You're trying to, like, and they're not going to pass. Like, everyone can kind of see that they're not going to pass, and if they do pass as presently constituted, it is a straight loss. So we're seeing, like, significant cuts to both entire programs and to the effectiveness of programs, which, in some ways is worse because it's almost like you're leaving a quarter on the table, like you're just, leaving a quarter as a tip on the table for, it's almost more insulting. It's like, I'll give you something, but I'll give you this just little means-tested amount. And they're doing this with childcare. They're doing this. They're going to try probably like do right now we're seeing community college scholarships. Right, like it's just a perfect Democratic bill. Just almost an improvement in the democraticness, and I'll say this in a bad way, in the complicatedness, in the means testing, in the bullshit that is packed through this bill to make it as complicated, as unusable, as expensive, and as just plain shitty, government programs for, people as much as possible. Like, that is pretty much what they're doing, and that, like, they succeed at that every time. Republicans will be like, the 9 most awful words in the English language, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. And then when the Democrats get into power, they pass programs, make the government as just shitty and as inefficient as they possibly can. That's how they serve their role in parts of the same game. So each initiative stands to be cut from anywhere from a third to a half from their initial proposed amounts. The estimates on how much vary by significant margins. A lot of stuff there we just do not know. Very interestingly, it seems like some of the more moderate senators on kind of both sides of the negotiating tables here seem like they have a deal. People are like talking confident. Brian Schatz, the Hawaii kind of pretend liberal senator, is like I haven't seen this much optimism. We're getting close, guys. But Manchin's just like, no, this is not happening. And Bernie, too, is quite pissed off as well. He apparently has been, we're gotten a little bit of a contentious meeting yesterday with Joe Manchin, where Joe Manchin straight up admitted, I'm fine with nothing. You can take it all off the table, see if I care. Which really, not only did it really call into question Biden's strategy in this one, it calls into question on Bernie's strategy on when they decided to put their foot down. Did they put their foot down too late? Should they have done it for the American Rescue Plan on things like the $15 minimum wage, the PRO Act? Should this fight have been had when Biden's first stimulus bill was being passed? And I think the answer is yes, because this is stuff that, like, people really need it. People, like, this was for Biden, for Manchin, this bill very much had to pass. Like, the next round of stimulus was just kind of like a window dressing. And it is really clear to see that is just not, it's really just not cutting it for people at this point in time. And now we're seeing a possibly higher corporate tax rate may be out of the deal due to demands of Senator Krysten Sinema. A new tax on billionaires' accrued wealth is newly in play as part of potentially significant shifts in Democrat tax plans from the legislation. So pretty much, Joe Manchin and Krysten Sinema will take turns saying, oh, how are you going to pay for this? Is it going to overheat the economy, entitlement mentality, blah, 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 blah. But when they try to raise taxes on the rich, they say, this is unacceptable. We can't raise taxes, not going to support this. But again, you've offered no ways to pay for it. This is outrageous. Simply, sir, I will not have it. It's just insane stuff there. It is. We can go through some of the key provisions real quickly here. All right, so let's go through here with climate change. So the emerging changes to the package come as Biden told House Democrats the legislation may have to spend up to $1.9 trillion versus the original $3.5 trillion. So the House version of the bill costs as much as $4.5 trillion there. So they still have to get it down, get it back to the House. But Sinema and Manchin have been adamant that overall spending figures must be drastically cut. Again, for them, it's all really not about substance, not about programs. So, they don't have any kind of specific objections to the program. It's all really is about stopping as much spending and any kind of redistributive, progressive spending. Just as much as possible. That's why Bernie came out and said we would be good with it. So, let's see. So they're pretty much searching for an alternative key measure at the point. It is looking like the single biggest part of the spending bill would have been hundreds of billions of dollars to fight climate. Democrats have remained optimistic that most of the initial White House climate proposal, including $300 billion in clean energy tax credits, is likely to be approved in the final bill. But Manchin's demands appear to have forced the Democrats to, again, this is the guy who gets $500,000 of coal and is deciding the fate of the just literally the entire world at this point. Again, it's not like anything that, was even in the original Biden bill would have been sufficient enough to, in terms of investment on climate change. There are real questions now with what we're seeing. Even if the Green New Deal would have been enough to get to where we need to be with climate change. But this here is certainly not. And Joe Manchin, one man from West Virginia, bought by the coal industry, bought and paid for by the coal industry, is really not, in just the fossil fuel industry, whatever. He goes to talk to an ExxonMobil lobbyist every week, as we now know. He is the guy who controlled this process. So Manchin's demands appear to have forced the Democrats to question whether they'll have to jettison perhaps the linchpin of their climate initiatives, which is the Clean Energy Payment Program that would create the financial incentives and penalties for utility companies to encourage them to transition to clean energy sources. Some Democratic lawmakers have been adamant they can still reach their carbon reduction targets even without the clean energy program. So carbons tax and emission trading system have been batted around, just really unpopular, bad ideas there. If that ends up getting in there. Daycare and preschool, it looks like the early education programs have appeared secure. Beyond the climate provisions, the bulk of the Democrats' package is designed to expand federal safety net and social programs through initiatives in healthcare, housing, education, and so on. Of social programs, the two that have consistently emerged as the safest are the Democrats' plan to establish a universal pre-K program and a new national child care program. Manchin has indicated support for universal pre-K, for instance, which already exists in West Virginia. Biden initially, so again, would not matter. Literally, something that even in West Virginia, which is a heavily Republican state, one of the poorest states in the nation, they already have that. So it really just shows you it's not that big of a deal in the first place. Although it is a good program, always good to make it universal, but there has to be a certain point where progressives are going to be actually serious about building power. We cannot just say, at least it's not nothing, at least it's not nothing, at least it's not nothing, because we all know where that mindset gets you. At some point, when things are burning down, that's going to seem quite pathetic, as they are literally right now. So Manchin has indicated support for pre-K, for instance. Biden initially has proposed $200 billion to expand universal and pre-K, as well as an additional $225 to subsidize $1 billion, that is, to subsidize child care, proposing to cap 7% of the income the amount of families can spend on child care for children younger than 5. So 7% of your income can be spent on child care. These plans appear likely to pass largely intact, although a report in the People's Policy Project, which, by the way, I trust way, and you should too, trust way more than the Washington Post, argued this week that the child care provision could drastically increase costs for middle-class families not eligible for the program's new subsidies. Democrats have denied this claim, which, if I were to know Matt Brunig and his style versus some of the accounts on Twitter, these Democratic outrider, Biden Defense Force accounts that have been all over Twitter today, kind of trying to attack Matt Brunig and his research, I would say that map reading the People's Policy Project is probably going to be more on the nose in this one. So this is another very disappointing one. This is the child tax credit, the crown of pretty much the Democratic anti-poverty push. So in the stimulus bill in March, the American Rescue Plan, the White House approved a one-year expansion of the child tax credit, so the benefit gave out substantially more money per child, and was also extended to reach millions of children in poverty that were previously denied the payment. So the White House proposed extending the more robust child benefit through 2025 at a cost of roughly $450 billion. Probably the most significant welfare program, and a real big expansion of the child tax credit that cut, I believe, child poverty by a third. Is the actual number turned out to be. Biden people were pushing half, but they did more cuts, and it ended up really hurting a third. So it turns out now they only want to keep that for a year. What it's going to happen is now Manchin has called for new work requirements on the government programs as part of the package, which could prevent parents who do not work. Which is there's a fair bit of parents that don't work because being a mom, full-time job. Got news for you there. After which, or a dad, a stay-at-home dad for that matter, after which Democrats would seek to extend it further as they try to bring down the cost of the package overall. So they can do 1 year, try to extend it further, and just see where they go. But, what is October right before, especially next year? The midterms. If Democrats lose the midterms in 2022, it could mean that Biden's signature expanded child tax credit may die only after a brief trial run. A very fitting kind of legacy of weakness for the Democratic Party, very similar to how so much of Obama's legacy was so easily erased in the next administration. Biden said, on Thursday, he does not support adding a work requirement to the child tax law or credit. Interesting here on taxes. To pay for the spending of the new measure, the White House has proposed trillions, and this is again the battle over pay-fors, and Krysten Sinema trying to attack the fact that the bill is not being paid for, and attacking mechanisms very conveniently that the White House is trying to come up with to pay for it here. House Democrats advanced a roughly $2 trillion tax plan that raised rates on individuals, corporations, and wealthy investors, among other measures. Due to resistance from Sinema, the administration is being forced to consider alternative approaches as the package inches forward. On a call this week with congressional Democrats, senior administration officials said they are discussing a series of measures that would not raise tax rates, which Sinema has opposed, but still raise trillions of dollars in new revenue, primarily from companies and the rich. So the measure discussed by the administration officials on the call included a new minimum tax on corporations, which, by the way, Manchin said he only wants 2 or 3 points up on that. That's the most he'll take, which again is nowhere near where it was pre-Trump, which is kind of hilarious. Again, no, the Democrats trying to again convince you they're not the party of Trump. They're trying to push past it. They're not like Trump, as we swear. But the White House has been adamant that its spending package will be fully paid for with new revenue, meaning it likely is to reach a new deal on tax provision for the whole proposal to advance. That's going to be a key part of nailing that down, is how we're going to pay for it, because Biden wants to do that. Sinema and Manchin definitely will not let him not do that. And they're going to try and make it as hard for him as they possibly can. And, again, very important to say, as we've been trying to emphasize kind of the whole time here, it's not just Sinema and Manchin. There are a bunch of people, a bunch of senators, a bunch of representatives we've already seen standing behind them and saying that we are just as, opposed to this as well. While there's close to unanimous support among Democrats about how early education programs, party leaders are dramatically split on how to expand health care through the legislation. Although left out of the administration's initial economic plan, White House officials agreed to back Senate Budget Chairman Bernie Sanders' proposal to extend new dental and vision and hearing benefits to tens of millions of Americans on Medicare. So dental, vision, and hearing, kind of basic benefits that people should be able to get through Medicare, especially obviously so well used by senior citizens. The initial provision cost as much as $380 billion, but Democrat lawmakers have suggested this week the program may have to be cut to $150 billion. So that means including all three benefits would be a reach, Biden said at the Thursday town hall. Manchin said he's opposed. He said Manchin's opposed, but the Democrats could cut a deal on an $800 voucher for Democrats for dental care instead. That, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be easily able to figure out how to get that. There's going to be no problems at all when it comes to administrating that. No way. Like, that will not be any sort of like massive kind of complex, like kind of similar to the federal rental assistance program, where just none of that money ever gets out. Not to mention it being just ridiculously pointless and like just. I hate vouchers and mean testing from the Democrats. That's all they do. It's ridiculous. Anyway, meanwhile, drafters of the President Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, have pushed hard for robust subsidies of those purchasing insurance on the public exchanges. That measure could prove more expensive, funnily enough, because again, the private insurance boosts, which is pretty much what Obamacare is inefficient. It's more expensive. It's just because you are dealing again with private insurance companies. What Bernie Sanders very smartly wants to do is expand Medicare, expand the government side of things, and that would actually be way more effective in getting just this, getting the comfortability level up, almost, if that's even a word, with people with government health care and improving Medicare. So, separately, other party leaders have pushed for inclusion of expansion of Medicaid to 2.2 million poor adults in mostly Republican-led states refusing Obamacare's expansion, which I definitely support. Lawmakers such as House Majority Whip James Clyburn and Raphael Warnock, Democrats in southern states that have rejected the Obamacare expansion, have argued that doing so is crucial to closing racial inequities in the country's healthcare system. So pretty much what's going to be, it's also going to be politically, it's going to be very, very smart to go into these states, go to these communities like where we saw, especially those, poor inner city communities that are in a lot of these southern states, and really kind of just say, look at what we did for you. Like we gave you an actual concrete, tangible thing. So it feels like worth it when people go to your door and like beg you to vote for the Democrats every year to no avail. Most Democrats would support all three healthcare programs, but party officials differ on which should be funded with limited resources. To pay for healthcare spending, Democrats have pushed for changing the existing law to allow Medicare to negotiate lower prescription drug prices, a measure aimed at both saving the government money and reducing seniors' prescription drug costs. But the plan's under fire from a trio of House lawmakers who said they support a more limited drug negotiation measure and voted against the bill during a key committee hearing in September. On the other side of the Capitol, a plan has not yet come together. A Senate Finance Committee Chairman Ron Wyden has worked for months to try and strike a balance between the more progressive people who actually want to do something their parties have been promising since 2006 already. Like they're like, come on, I think we should actually be able to do this already. And they're right, I think. I don't think that's a very crazy thing. If you're like a representative who's been promising this stuff since 2006, you actually have a chance to get it done. It is very, very, got to be very frustrating to see that not coming together. On care, the White House is widely expected to be forced to cut a range of other programs, such as its proposals for housing, elder care for seniors, and paid family and medical leave from its initial ambition. So again, we're going to continue here to be the country, one of the only developed countries that does not offer paid medical and family leave. The administration's initial housing plan, including hundreds of billions of dollars to create millions of new housing units and house hundreds of thousands of homeless Americans. The housing program would have funded vouchers for low-income tenants and repairs to public housing units. So really good stuff, but it's not clear which there is on the chopping block. On immigration, there is still some hope for immigration reform. They have allotted about $100 billion to immigration, but how it gets divided still depends on how the Senate parliamentarian rules, what is going to be germane. So, and of course, what the Senate parliamentarian says goes. So Democratic senators such as Majority Leader Charles Schumer, Richard Durbin, Alex Padilla, and Robert Menendez are preparing their third proposal for the parliamentarian in the coming days. Unlike previous proposal that focused on creating a pathway to citizenship for a broad swath of undocumented immigrants, current negotiations are focused on reforming the green card visa system to make it more accessible to the certain undocumented groups like farm workers and recipients of DACA. Division among Democrats on whether the parliamentarian's word is final, with some pushing to override her recommendation, which I do not think will happen. Also, I don't think any of this substantive immigration stuff is actually going to happen either, given that Biden is currently aggressively pursuing pretty much the same policies that Trump is at the moment. More and smaller right now is apparently prevailing over bigger and fewer here in the Washington Post. When it became clear the White House would have to shrink the legislation by as much as 60%, administration officials faced a difficult choice. They could either pursue a plan that contains partial investments across a wide range of areas, or one that approved a handful of programs, but each done in a durable and robust way. Several administration officials privately said they prefer legislation that took aggressive and comprehensive action on only a handful of priorities, but ultimately, however, the party appears to be pursuing the more diffuse approach. I personally think that, if you have to, which I don't think you do, but if you absolutely have to, I think would be better to get, 2 or 3 big wins and, really take care of those issues, rather than just kind of continuing over that very classic Democrat, incremental, we'll get there kind of approach that always seems to turn out to just more moderation, more incremental change, that just does not really get anybody anywhere very fast. So, with that being said, I think that kind of sums up where we are with reconciliation for now. And I think what we will do is head on over to our next story, a little check-in from Ryan Grimm.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh.
It's news flash.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. Very, very good story here from Ryan Grimm in The Intercept. He writes, Senator Krysten Sinema is the dying scream of a corporate Democratic Party. And it may seem like, it does seem very depressing, because it's like, this is not a good time to be, the left feels like in the Democratic Party like it's on the back foot, especially after Bernie, especially after seeing these 2 senators really handicap a lot of the progressive parties that have been able to get into this reconciliation bill, and Biden, and even like Bernie and AOC and all the people we depend on the squad, not seeming to do too much about it. Things are looking a bit frustrating at the moment for sure. And it seems like Krysten Sinema and Joe Manchin are president and vice president. So let's see what Ryan Grimm has to say on that. Krysten Sinema might be on the young side for a senator, less than half the age of some of her colleagues, but she represents the Democratic Party's past. Think of her and Senator Joe Manchin as dead hands reaching out of the grave, grabbing at the party as it tries to move on for them. They might have managed to claw back spending on the Build Back Better Act, but the reality is that their time has passed, and it is clear. And the way you can measure that is most directly in terms of dollars. For Sinema, in particular, her approach to the negotiations, to push against social spending and tax hikes on the rich and corporations, has actually cost her badly in the polls at home, and hasn't had much of an upside when it comes to campaign cash. Much of the cash she's been raising from big money that she would have pretty much raised anyway. Her model of politics is outdated, though. It has been the dominant form for most of her life. In the 1980s, in response to the Reagan Revolution, the ongoing realignment that broke when Democrats thought it was a permanent stranglehold, on Congress, the party developed what was called at the time a PAC funding strategy. PAC strategy, which is pretty much called fundraising today. Republican candidates in 1980 have heavily outspent Democrats who believed that their name recognition and long record, they implemented the New Deal, won World War II, enacted the Great Society, and so on, meant that the GOP would be wasting money on television. When that turned out to be not the case, Democrats realized that they needed comparable money of their own, and the fundraising idea was that since Democrats still had durable control of the House of Representatives for about 14 more years, they could raise some money, and businesses that had interest before Congress needed to start ponying up for access, and pony up they would. Access quickly turned to alliance, and the party drifted heavily in a pro-business direction. These new Democrats argued that the party had to beat back the power of special interests, and by special interests, that meant civil rights advocates, environmentalists, labor unions, things like that. Those special interests, not like banks, fossil fuel companies, stuff like that. The presidential campaign of Jesse Jackson pushed back against this hegemonic approach, but without a way to aggregate grassroots enthusiasm into the money needed for national infrastructure. The threat was neutralized. Starting with Howard Dean, the 2004 presidential race, it finally started to look possible that a candidate funded by a large number of small individual donations could compete with one funded by the rich and corporations. So then, of course, we had presidential candidate at the time, Barack Obama, showed the promise of small dollars in 2008, but he also raised an insane amount of money from Wall Street, and once in office, abandoned the network of small dollars he had built and went with the big money. In 2016, obviously, Bernie Sanders nearly toppled the Clinton machine with his famous $27 contributions. In 2018, the small dollar revolution spread to Northern Democrats, with anti-Trump resistance liberals throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at congressional Democrats, enabling them to retake the House. In 2020, small dollars did it again, and the resource-rich Democrats took both the House and the Senate. One of the people who noticed this shift was Senator Chuck Schumer, once known as Wall Street Chuck, but thanks to all of these small dollar donors, he now serves as the Senate Majority Leader. A lot of people have chalked up Schumer's pivot towards progressives as fear of a primary challenge from Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and no doubt that's part of what's going on. Another factor is that Schumer is used to delivering for donors, and so they keep the spigot flowing. And Schumer's donors are now rank-and-file Democratic activists throwing in $27 at a time. In 2020, 41% of the money raised by the Democratic Senate candidates came from donations of less than $200. What they want to see is Democrats fighting for what they ran on, so Schumer is happy to give them that fight. And, this is what the theory of change was. This is what was kind of set out by, people like Justice Democrats. I remember, when I was first getting into politics, I was, listening to, Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, and stuff like that. And this is what, he said would happen. Who do they answer to? It's all about follow the money, what are the incentives, and who controls the incentives. And, it just seemed like such a far thing at the time. And that's why, it should give so much fuel to Energy's fight. We're still not where we need to be. But in the past 3 to 5 to 6 years, 3 to 6 years, there has been some real progress being made. There is no doubt about that. Chuck Schumer, once Wall Street Chuck, is now, he's no, progressive, hardcore guy. There's no doubt about that. But he is, he's genuinely, is part of the political consideration what people other than corporations do now, at least for the Senate Majority Leader, which is saying something that's pretty significant. Really, it is. Schumer also knows that raising corporate money is not actually that efficient because each one of these lobbyists or rich people requires coddling, demands intimate access, want internships for their kids, wants a dinner, a speech, and a photo, and so on and so on. Small dollar donors just want you to win and deliver what you promised. And that second part is the test for Democrats at the moment. They don't expect you ever to meet you unless you're volunteering at a headquarters. They're volunteering at a headquarters where you happen to stop by. Over the summer, Sinema showed just how much work it is. For the past few months, we treated endless stories about Sinema skipping important events in Washington to be at this or that fundraiser and even leaving the country to go to Paris to raise money. For all that trouble, she broke her fundraising record, reporting $1.1 million in the third quarter. Bunch of pharma cash, and that's her record since she became a senator. But when she was a candidate running for Senate back in the third quarter of 2018, and when Democratic voters thought she was a progressive and wanted to help flip her Republican seat, she raised almost $7 million. That's not a fluke. You might think that 2018 was a special year and the Democratic small donors were all fired up since President Donald Trump is not going to be fired up anymore since President Donald Trump is out of office and kicked off Twitter. But that argument falls apart when you start looking at individual candidates. Fellow Arizona Senator, Democratic Senator Mark Kelly is totally fine with his $3.5 trillion proposal for the Reconciliation bill, voted for a minimum wage increase, supports passing parts of the labor reform legislation called the PRO Act, and generally supports all kinds of reforms that Sinema is battling. Kelly, who's up for re-election, raised $8.2 million this past quarter, not 1.1 like Pharma Sinema, while the Republican candidate expected to win that primary raised just over $500,000. Okay, you're thinking maybe Kelly just has a ton more rich friends than Sinema. Well, the way to test that hypothesis is to look at the FEC records for how many of the contributions were itemized, how many were unitemized, and how many were just from PACs. Unitemized means that it was less than 200. PACs are generally corporate PACs, but they also could be for labor unions, and Kelly probably did well from them after supporting the PRO Act. In the last 3 months, Kelly has raised $3.4 million from small donors, according to his FEC report. In other words, he raised 3 times more than Sinema, just from small donors, even while Sinema was making a corporate-loving spectacle of herself and traveling the world to raise money. He made nothing from PACs, and his $3.8 million in itemized contributions to the Democrat in a swing state can back the Biden agenda and still raise money from big donors. At this point, this kind of stuff, what Sinema is doing, is becoming less and less politically necessary and more of a choice. That is something that was just not the case, which is very good to see. Ladies and gentlemen, we have so many fun things to report here at the Spencer Walsh Radio Network that you're going to want to tune into. First and foremost, we have Newsflash, our flagship show, which will be on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, of course. And now, for the first time ever, we have the Spencer Walsh Show in a rare collaboration and syndication with WMFO 91.5 in Somerville and Medford. It'll be on the air there first and live 1 to 2 p.m. every single Monday. And from there, we'll put it on SD Run podcast feed within 24 hours. That's the lineup. Just keep listening to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, wherever you get your podcasts. So, ladies and gentlemen, have you seen the Netflix hit series Squid Game? Well, according to opinion writer Frank Bruni, it's very popular, and it's not just according to him. It is very popular, but apparently the popularity of it is terrifying, and I'd be interested to find out why that is. So let's get into it. Let's see why the popularity of Squid Game is terrifying here. Be interested to know. So at the beginning of the second episode of the dystopian... By the way, spoiler here, I think. I don't know. At the beginning of the second episode of the dystopian fantasy Squid Game, anonymous villains load the box corpses of hundreds of contestants who've been gunned down for their failures into incinerators. But one body still twitches. Its fingers crawl out of the gap between the lid and the rest of the box, so the lid is stapled shut. It's cremation for the person regardless. That's not even the most disturbing image of the 9 episodes of the Squid Game, and the show, which began streaming on Netflix last month, has apparently been the service's biggest debut ever. Are there teenagers and young adults in your life? Ask them about Squid Game. They probably watched it, and they quite possibly loved it, and that terrifies me. A Korean language production, awash in blood, Squid Game is less a feat of ingenious storytelling, though there are some deft touches and inspired wrinkles, than a gory riff on a familiar formula, a hyper-violent Hunger Games with a measurably darker view of the world. You know what? I'd say that's fair. Like, a lot of the stuff about Squid Game has just been people hyped because everyone's like, "Oh, did you see Squid Game? So good, so good, so good." I think people get ooh, what's the new Korean thing that's so cool to like? Then they hype it up, and it's from another place. It's like, oh, how cool is it? It's a very good. It gets you more the shock value than the actual storytelling. I think that's a fair critique to say. But yeah, it's very violent and definitely has a lower opinion of the world, which I think is justified. So pretty much, if you don't know, it's economically desperate South Koreans agree to be imprisoned in a remote, bizarre arena where they compete in adult versions of children's games where the losers are shot. So aware of the stakes, they elect to continue playing because they've been promised a future-changing amount of prize money if they prevail, and because their existences beyond the arena are just as dehumanizing. So pretty much what happens is they get kind of kidnapped into the game. They play the first game, everyone dies, or not everyone, but a bunch of people die, and everyone freaks out, so they vote. They all decide to go home. Then they realize how bad their lives are because they're all in some form of debt or something like that. And then they all decide to come back. So, yeah, so it's very, very on the nose there. In fact, the episode of Squid Game titled Hell isn't about the competition, in which one false move equals a bullet to the head. It's about life outside the arena. It's about a punitively affluent society in which the divide between the rich and poor, and between the lucky and unlucky, is gaping. To land on the wrong side of it is to be damned. That this vision appeals to so many viewers, especially young ones, suggests a chilling and bleak perspective on capitalism, on freedom, on individual agency that should stop us in our tracks. Yeah, again, like, what is this surprising? Like, how's this surprising to anybody who's been, like, remotely paying attention to, like, circumstances and things on the ground? Like, who this should terrify? When he's talking about us, he's talking about the New York Times, the people who write for it, and the people who read it, who don't know what's going on in this country. Like, they fundamentally do not understand where most Americans are in this country. So, in the jarring, horrifying first episode, as contestants begin to be killed by the dozens, an unidentified mastermind cues up music and pours a cocktail to savor with his view of the massacre, which calls to mind the school shootings that a generation of American children have grown up with. God is an assassin, tipsy and merciless in his gilded lair. Maybe the viewers of Squid Game just thrill to the bold, cartoon-colored shock of it. I think certainly it's like the clout factor, oh, look at this, I'm watching Squid Game, I'm watching a cool new thing. That's certainly a part of it, but, it also, it speaks to something broader, I think, that's for sure. Its virtual and spiritual aesthetic are what you kind of get if you cross an episode of Teletubbies with a highlight reel of Quentin Tarantino at his grisliest. There's some suspense inherent in learning slowly who dies, who survives, and who that mastermind is. Frank Bruni canvassed all the cool young people he knows, and said most people said that they couldn't look away. And the insane premise, he was very captivated by it. Very few shows have its wow factor, but the fact they're not repelled by the incessant bloodletting and the many characters' flamboyant cruelty to one another says something weird and disturbing about modern sensibilities. We're entertained by extremes, says 23-year-old who zoomed through Squid Game in 2 days. Told me there's even that's. The only reason I didn't watch it in 2 days is because I was watching it with someone and I had to wait. But then there's the indiscriminate manner in which a huge hit becomes an even bigger phenomenon, a trend, divorced from its actual content. I think that's a bigger factor here that people aren't appreciating. Mike Hale, the a television critic for The Times, widely noted the meme readiness of Squid Game. The Times also published an article by Vanessa Friedman about how the tracksuits were newly hot because the Squid Game contestants wear them. It's kind of a prison uniform. The Times published another article by Christina Morales about the history of Dalgona candy, which is a deadly prop in one of the series' elimination contests. There's a link to instructions about how to make it. In a week and a half on Halloween, we'll be bombarded by Squid Game costumes. And the Wall Street Journal weighed in on that as well. To some extent, Squid Game is big because it's big. It's first plus popularity, generating attention that begets even greater popularity as everyone wants in on the action. So always a big part of it. As a curiosity's slippery tentacles reach farther and farther into people's consciousness. But its commentary on class, greed, and savagery is much too central to be incidental. That commentary may, as Mike wrote, be a thin veneer of pertinence meant to justify the unrelenting carnage, but it's there, thin or not, along with that carnage, and tens of millions of viewers are riveted. For many of them, if not all of them, to at least some degree, this portrait of life as a sadistic lottery and poverty as a hopeless torture chamber has resonance, which also means it has merit. That's a bullet to the soul. Okay, so really what he's starting to realize is people liking Squid Game is how Frank Bruni realizes that this country is in dire need of change. I guess that's one way of doing it, but bro, where have you been this whole time? This is the thing that decided that people are unsatisfied with the direction the country's going right now. And this guy's an opinion writer for the New York Times. I swear, where do they find these people? All right, that's our show for today. We're back on Monday.